Hello and welcome to another episode of the djproject Criterion Collection, where I go through all the Criterion DVDs that I own, all 150 of them. I have just gotten through 10 episodes in a week. I don't know how productive that will be. I mean, it just all depends on time and being able to fit everything in, but I'll just keep on plowing through. And this is kind of a big one, although hopefully it won't be as long as some of the other ones. We look at Spine 51, Brazil, directed by Gilliam, 1985. It's deceptively big. Anyways, but it's all one film. What is Brazil? Actually, the best way to sum it up was the way that my father introduced it to me for the first time. He said, imagine Monty Python doing 1984. And that really is the best succinct description of what you get out of that film. It takes a look at this society somewhere in the 20th century where it's a society that's ruled by basically two entities. The first is the Ministry of Information, and they exist to provide, I don't know what they exist, they just exist. Basically, it's everything you ever hated about any kind of government bureaucracy, whether it's in the United States or in Europe. It's all there, all the cattiness amongst the uppers and amongst various department heads, all of the inefficiencies disguising as efficiencies, all the procedures, all the forms, and probably one of my favorite little shop moments is all the clerks that are busy running around doing work, whereas they would prefer to be watching old westerns. To seeing all these clerks gather around the monitors and watching westerns. I mean, this anticipated YouTube 20 years before it actually happened. So there you go. Resentment towards work is always there. So that's the one entity, and the other entity is Central Services, which is imagine Target or Walmart run in the worst possible way. I mean, say what you will about, well, especially say what you will about Walmart. I know that's a very popular punching bag with things, but just imagine that worse, or actually, yeah, I'll stand by I was going to throw in department stores too, but really, it's like the worst superstore you can ever go to. A lot has been said about Brazil by other people, and my goal is to try as much as possible to add something new. Actually, the big thing I wanted to comment on was a I don't know the full quote, but apparently there was a somewhat recent interview with Terry Gilliam where he expressed bemusement that Brazil is very popular amongst the, quote, far right in America, which I'll try to make these episodes be about politics, but since we're talking about a political subject, there's no use getting into. First off, I dislike the whole left-right divide. If you know anything about the history of modern politics, it was actually something that was used within a particular set of parties to discredit each other, and that somehow the point is that if you're not socialist, or if you don't favor socialism, that means you're the enemy. That means you're considered the right, and somehow fascism gets lumped into it. And I definitely do not like socialism. I definitely do not like fascism. I see them as really no different from each other. But that doesn't make me some far-right nut. If you want to know my political philosophies, I lean heavily towards what I call classical liberalism, basically the English political philosophy tradition started with Thomas Hobbes and then continuing on to John Locke and Adam Smith. Basically before it gets all utilitarian and kind of odd. Anyways, that's kind of where it's... So actually I can tell you exactly why it's popular amongst those types, the libertarians, if you will. It's because it does satirize and poke fun of the worst of the state in both counts, in both just the government itself and also whenever the government tries to do business, which is probably part of Gilliam's bemusement, is he usually associates the right as being favoring business, and he notices all the jabs towards business. There's nothing about central services that indicates true business, and this is through central services. Anyways, but like I said, the Ministry of Information, that is the government end of it, represents the worst of bureaucracy. So, yeah, everything you never liked about bureaucracy is all there in it. But central services represents the worst traits you can do in business. It's basically an inefficiently run operation, and they're supposedly supposed to be responsible for providing any and all material needs that this society has, and again in the worst possible way. The very first thing you see in the film, apart from the first thing after you hear that song, you see this advert playing on the televisions, advertising ducks. DUCTS. Who cares about ducks? But apparently Central Services does, and believes that ducks are a way of expressing your personality, or words to that effect. And you're thinking, really? You're really wasting my time with this? So, yeah, it's poking fun of that side. It's this belief that we're going to provide you with things that you want, which probably you don't really need. And so anyways, but central services is not the free market. It's an example of state capitalism, and the way that central services is run is really no different than the Ministry of Information. They have their own procedures. They have their own forms. 27B/6 anyone? It's just really, really run. In fact, the best line, and I'm looking this up because I want to make sure that I say this correctly. The best line happens when, at a certain point, in Sam's apartment, his air conditioning goes out, and then it immediately turns hot and nasty. It's like living inside a boiler. The only reprieve he can get is if he sticks his head in the refrigerator to keep cool. He tries calling Central Services. This happens in the middle of the night. He tries calling Central Services, and he is told that between the hours of 2300 and 700 hours, they cannot take calls at this time, even though he says that this is an emergency. To which the recording goes on, says, "Thank you very much, this has not been a recording." And then it loops again. But anyways, this call gets intercepted by a man named Harry Tuttle, who is also inadvertently the cause of some confusions as far as some arrests are concerned. It's really, really difficult this is a story where there's a lot that goes on. It's really hard to sort of sum up. And I think even after you see the film, it's really hard to sum up. So this is why I want to try to keep it to specific points, or try to keep it a little bit more focused. But anyways, so Harry Tuttle intercepts this call, and he doesn't work for Central Services, but he's a heating engineer, and he knows pretty much what he's doing, even though he's not official. And as he's working, he gets into this little discussion with Sam Lowry, and one of the things he really couldn't stand about, and Sam even suggests to him that why don't you work for Central Services? It might be easier. He says, "Nah, I couldn't stand the tape. The paperwork, couldn't stand the paperwork." And then Sam goes, "Well, I suppose one has to expect a certain amount." To which he replies, "Why? I came to this game for the action, the excitement. Go anywhere, travel light, get in, get out, wherever there's trouble, a man alone. Now they got the whole country sectioned off. You can't make a move without a form. That right there is the difference between a genuine free market and state capitalism. What he's talking about is it's a rephrasing of the famous passage from Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations, where he talks about that it's not the benevolence of the butcher, baker, and brewer from whence we get our meal, but it's by everyone acting in their own self-interest. For Tuttle, he has certain things that he wants to do. He goes into this for the job itself. He likes the job. There's a lot of perks to it. There may be some groaners, there may be some moments where he pulls his hair, but for the most part, he likes it, and he wants to be able to do that. And working for central services is not serving the self-interest. It actually does more of the things that he doesn't like, and more of the things that have nothing to do with his job. I mean, for him, he goes in, he figures it out, he finds the solution. Is it the right way? Is it the official way? Does he have proper stuff? No, but it gets the job done. And whereas central services, yes, well, you could have waited for central services, but considering the way central services acts, you think, really, do you really want these guys to service his apartment? No. So this is why it's a favorite amongst the far right in America. Basically, anyone who's libertarian enjoys this film because it definitely pokes at government bureaucracy and feeling that that there has to be a state entity that will ensure safety, ensure that everybody, all this stuff. And the only reason why the administrative information is created is because there is this ongoing terrorist threat. And you're never really told why, and that's not really the point. The point is that they perceive themselves to be threatened for some reason. And probably it's just because they're irritating as hell. There's nothing. To try to look for any kind of substantive depth is going to be a futile exercise because it wasn't really constructed that way. It was more, to quote Tom Stoppard's own views, who helped out with the script. He sensed it as more of a gut fear of what the state can do and what current society is like. It's not trying to make a thesis, his words. So to imply that it's not like with, even though I said that this is Monty Python taking on 1984, it was not constructed in the same way as 1984 or even Brave New World, where you get a sense of how the mechanics of this society. In fact, that's kind of the beautiful thing with Brazil, is that this is a dysfunctional society. It's a dysfunctional dystopia, is what this is. It's really miserable. It's really depressing. You think, God, there's got to be something better than this, but it doesn't work. It has its own kind of oppression. It has its own kind of infringement on, if you believe in the idea of natural rights, that man is inherent with natural rights, including life, liberty, and property, then this is a gross infringement. Again, this is why this is popular amongst libertarians and classical liberals. But it doesn't. But the really frustrating thing is that it doesn't work. It sets out to do these great and wonderful things, but it doesn't work. Another big thing I wanted to mention is in the character of Sam Lowry. He's the main. He's sort of the guide, if you will, to this, because everything kind of pretty much revolves around him. And I sort of thought of him as a kind of anti-everyman. And by that I mean is somebody who is a blank slate, kind of represents everybody, but represents everyone in the worst way. Actually, a better trope title is "This Idiot Is You." Thank you, TV tropes, for that. Um, but yeah, this because the thing with Sam Lowry is that he is a very meek, reserved guy, and he wants nothing more than to be. He really wants to be left alone. He wants to do the least amount of damage to himself and to others, and he really just wants to be left alone. He's much more comfortable living in his dreams, living out particular fantasies, and not really doing all that much. In spite of having a very socially ambitious mother with means of pulling strings and so forth. In spite of having that, he really just wants to be left alone. But he gets himself into this circumstance, and this is related to the Tuttle and Buttle confusion. Yes, there's talk about dysfunction. There is a bug gets into the printer and screws up one of the reports, and instead of trying to arrest Tuttle, they end up arresting Buttle, and someone who is not involved in terrorist activities. And because of his involvement with that, it starts to unwind him, and really, not only does he cast a light, as it were, on the dysfunction of the society, but you also get to see the dysfunction in himself. And boy, is that ever cheery. But anyway, so Brazil. What else can be... I mean, this is one of those films you can say a lot. And as I said earlier, this was not constructed with any kind of depth, but it's not lost in its details. And from a production design standpoint, and from an effects standpoint, it's really quite remarkable. And especially given that this was very much a kind of off the wall production. It was arguably a miracle that it was ever made at all. But it's the design, the look was very inspiring, and some people even try to match that, or even try to work against it if at all possible. So it's there's definitely a lot of details. There's definitely a lot of intrigues. I guess some other little things that I can mention. This can be in the group of alternate Christmas films. If you want to see Christmas films that you don't normally think of as Christmas films, this is an example of one of them. Others include Die Hard, The Manchurian Candidate, and my parents' favorite, The Lion in Winter. Actually, with that one is amusing because if you don't have to entertain guests at all that year, it's a good reminder of, hey, this is what you've missed by not doing this. So anyway, so it's a good alternative film. I did get a chance to see this when it played at the Brattle Theatre in Cambridge. And one of the things that I noticed was, I mean, it is one of those films that you should see projected large. If you ever get a chance to see it projected large, definitely take it. But the thing that I noticed, and because you can pick out a lot of details and a lot of things really are in your face, but the thing I noticed is that the sound mix is aggressively loud, especially during the action sequences, which is very interesting because it is often hailed as a kind of art house flick. Well, this is what Universal thought it was at the time. Oh, this would make a good art house flick. But the sound, I found that the sound mix on the action sequences is louder than in most action films, and this is part of what Gilliam was interested in satirizing, not just societies, but I think he was also satirizing certain films as well. The action blockbusters that started in the 70s and then continued on into the 80s, what he calls the Spielberg-Lucas type films. And he was kind of poking at problems with those films. And I think by having the sound so aggressively loud, he's making a point of how aggressive these films can be. It's a kind of exaggeration to make a point. So that's something else that I've noticed. Yeah, I don't want to turn this into just rambling, but considering I got a few other films I want to talk about. But yeah, I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to talk more about Brazil. But I guess the last thing, as far as, since this is talking about the Criterion Collection, Brazil has been pretty synonymous with the Criterion Collection as far as what the Criterion Collection is all about. I mean, as I showed you, it's a very thick box. This is 3 discs. Now, they have released other box sets even with more discs than this, and you think, what is the point of looking at it this way? Well, for starters, this was one of the first multi-disc sets that they had. This was actually ported over from the Laserdisc edition, which I believe the first edition was 10 Laserdiscs long. Like all the material, the film itself, all the supplements, various other little videos that were there, and including the Love Conquers All version. If you want to see what studios think of as far as films, it's a good one to watch. It will infuriate you, especially if you like Brazil, because of all the changes that were made. It's a really good object lesson to tell you that this is what happens if studios really have their way. And now we've gotten to the point where I think a lot of films that come out now are closer to that Love Conquers All version. But anyways, but all of that originally took up 10 Laserdiscs. When it was released on DVD, it took up 3 discs. And it was initially issued with, it was not anamorphically enhanced for widescreens and so forth. And then it got reissued in 2006, not just as a 3-disc set, but also as a single disc. If you don't want all the supplements, if you just want the film itself, it was released as a single disc in 2006. And late last year, it was finally released on Blu-ray, where it just only took up two discs. But at any rate, so the point of all of this is that it's a flagship title for Criterion, and I would say that part of the appeal for the design, as far as this, is that it does go along with the theme of inefficiency or inefficiency disguised as efficiency. I mean, just to have something this obnoxious. And I do mean this as a compliment. I'm not criticizing this at all. It's just, but if you think about it, there's not a lot of elegance to this. It definitely fits with that theme of a clunky, broken machine. I think that's all you can really say about Brazil. So, so there you go, Brazil. And until next time, take care.